your destiny. TheorySabers.com. George Lucas understood that Star Wars was more than a space adventure. It was about spiritual growth and the battle between light and darkness within each and every one of us, and that it's never too late to change your path. Lucas took inspiration from world religions, mythology, and philosophy to shape a saga that resonates on a deeper level. Yoda's teachings in The Empire Strikes Back, or Qui-Gon Jinn's emphasis on the living Force in The Phantom Menace, show that the Force was always meant to be mysterious, transcendent. In contrast, Disney's approach feels shallow. Rey's journey in the sequels is more about discovering powers than understanding the Force's philosophy.
Rey Skywalker.
There's no training, no meditation, no sense of connection. It's almost as if Disney sees the Force as a tool to create cool moments rather than a guiding principle. And why is this? Because depth takes time, and time doesn't generate fast profits. As we know from Bob Iger's biography, they were rushing to get Star Wars movies out as fast as they could to meet Q4 projections. Disney, at the end of the day, is a business, and this video isn't to expose more of their shortcomings when it comes to being creative and understanding what Star Wars is and George Lucas's legacy, but rather to shed light on what they've done in order to fix it, and to say that it's not too late. In this video, I will explain many of the contrasts between the George Lucas Star Wars movies and the short-sighted Disney Star Wars movies, what they did wrong, and how they can change to make things come back to the way it was. Because at the end of the day, we just want better Star Wars. We want Star Wars to be what it was when we were kids, which is timeless under George's vision. To bring back his vision, Disney needs to let the Force be mystical, complex, and something characters actually struggle to comprehend, not just instantly master. George built his characters with care, letting them grow, evolve, and hold on to their core values. But Disney's handling of these legacy characters, it feels more like a dismantling than a tribute. Luke Skywalker, one of cinema's greatest heroes, and one of mine, was reduced to a broken man with no hope. Han Solo went from a dedicated leader to a failed father who abandoned his family, and Leia, once a fearless leader, is almost a side note. In Return of the Jedi, Luke is willing to sacrifice himself for his father's redemption. But Disney's Luke in The Last Jedi is a man who nearly kills his nephew in fear. Luke's defining trait was his unbreakable hope, so turning him into a disillusioned hermit felt less like character development and more like Disney trying to subvert expectations for shock value. And let's not even talk about the complete disservice to Han and Leia's relationship, a relationship that Lucas spent 3 films building. Instead of showing these characters as battle-worn but resilient, Disney chose to make them shells of their former selves. It's like they tore them down to reboot the series without any regard for who they once were. Why? Because apparently, legacy doesn't matter if it doesn't drive ticket sales. Like I said, Disney is a business. We get it. But here's the issue. Star Wars became legendary because it wasn't treated like a product assembly line. Under Lucas, Star Wars was a carefully built story, released over decades, away from Hollywood and created from an independent mind. And how has it been since Disney took over? Well, they've pushed out a few movies and a bunch of shows. I'd say the best of those were Rogue One, The Mandalorian, and Tales of the Jedi.
If you only knew the power.
And they've done this all in the span of over 10 years now. It's clear that in the beginning they were prioritizing quantity over quality, and it was the bombing of Solo, which was, in reaction to The Last Jedi being absolutely horrible, which led Kathleen Kennedy to believe that they were creating too many things too fast and they needed to slow down. She then changed her mind years later to say that the reason Solo bombed wasn't because they were releasing too many projects too fast, but it was actually because they didn't use deepfake for such legendary characters like Han Solo played by Harrison Ford. And so the audience didn't feel like they really connected with the character. This is the same person who told us, Star Wars fans, that there is no source material, no comic books, no games, nothing.
We don't have source source material.
Now, The Mandalorian was a refreshing exception to all of this because it actually focused on telling a story first. But even The Mandalorian has become a cash cow for Disney, used to keep subscriptions up and fuel merchandise sales. Imagine if Disney took their time with Star Wars, focusing on fewer, high-quality projects rather than an endless conveyor belt of content to meet Q4 analytics and earnings. Lucas spent years crafting his vision. Disney barely lets one project breathe before moving on to the next, eager to turn a profit. Now, they could do this, I believe, with the same kind of output, but they just need to hire talented people who actually understand Star Wars and care about it. Not people who ridicule and shit on George Lucas like Leslie Headland, who essentially blew $300 million on The Acolyte for some sort of a weird therapy session for herself. Complex characters are at the heart of great storytelling, but Disney's approach has been much more formulaic. Rey's journey feels almost like a checklist. Find her powers, win some fights, face a villain, and move on. There's no real inner struggle or development whatsoever. Ask yourself, what did she do to really train and develop her powers, her immense powers? Luke's journey was powerful because he failed. He doubted. He grew. When he lost to Vader in The Empire Strikes Back, it wasn't just a physical loss. It was a shattering of his entire identity. Rey? Well, she seemed to have it all figured out. Her biggest challenge is finding out that she's a Palpatine, which is practically dropped as soon as it's introduced.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
It's almost as if Disney didn't want to take the risk of letting their protagonist struggle because struggles don't sell action figures. Well, I would argue. Then we have Kylo Ren, Disney's attempt at a tragic villain. He had incredible potential, but his redemption in The Rise of Skywalker was practically an afterthought. Contrast this with Anakin's fall and redemption. Lucas dedicated an entire trilogy to showing Anakin's pain, his choices, his manipulation by Palpatine. Kylo? His redemption is so sudden, it barely makes sense. It's like Disney needed a quick fix to wrap up his story and tie up loose ends. What else can you expect when you don't have directors talking to each other properly, planning out the trilogy, or really understanding Star Wars? And Finn? I mean, don't even get me started on the poor guy. A stormtrooper who defects could have been one of the most compelling characters in Star Wars. Remember in the beginning of The Force Awakens, when he started to get all disoriented and he was coming to, like as if his mind had been wiped for so many years and maybe he was some sort of a Force-sensitive Jedi that they were trying to get information out of? Or perhaps maybe Luke wiped his mind, knowing that he was about to be captured so that they wouldn't get any sort of vital information from him? And maybe he goes back to Luke or goes back to his lineage and becomes a Jedi once again and rises to stardom and becomes the hero that we all needed. Instead, Disney sidelines him, and by The Rise of Skywalker, he's practically a glorified sidekick that just screams out Rey. Not to mention they shrunk him in the Chinese poster, and you can probably guess why. Imagine if Disney had actually explored Finn's trauma, his conflict with his past as a stormtrooper, but that would have required nuance and depth, and apparently, Disney didn't see the value in that. Before Disney, the expanded universe, now called Legends, was a treasure trove of rich stories, beloved characters, and lore that added depth to the Star Wars universe. Something that Kathleen Kennedy had no idea actually existed when she said there was no source material. Disney erased this overnight, and instead, they've given us a new canon that feels hollow. Maybe it's so they don't have to pay royalties to what came before it, I don't know. While there have been some successes, like the reintroduction of Thrawn, Disney's new material often feels like it's cherry-picking the expanded universe for fan service rather than truly honoring it. Fans were excited to see Thrawn in Rebels and hints of the Old Republic in The Mandalorian, but there's so much more Disney could do with the rich history that Lucas helped establish. Instead, they focus on safer, more marketable stories. It's like they just don't trust the audience to appreciate the deep lore. George's Star Wars embraced complexity, while Disney's plays it safe, and frankly, I don't think they even really know Star Wars all that well. Unless you get Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau in there, but then they're playing it safe too, and it makes me wonder, are they being controlled? George knew that a real, grounded aesthetic was essential to making Star Wars feel authentic. That's why he used practical effects, miniatures, and real locations whenever possible. Disney, meanwhile, leans heavily on CGI, which often gives scenes a hollow, artificial look. For example, look at the Kenobi show. Everything was extremely claustrophobic. The Mandalorian proved that fans respond to practical effects, and it feels like Star Wars because it looks like Star Wars. Disney could easily bring back this hands-on approach, but it's costly and time-consuming, kind of like The Acolyte's almost $300 million budget. Instead, they stick with CGI because it's faster and cheaper, but faster and cheaper isn't the Star Wars way, is it? Under George Lucas, Star Wars had a clear vision, even if it was controversial. Disney's lack of a cohesive vision is painfully obvious. The sequels don't even follow a single storyline. They've gone from a different director with each sequel to appointing committee-led productions. Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni have shown they understand George's legacy. Give Star Wars to someone who cares about the story more than the merchandise, and we might just get the galaxy we remember. In the end, Star Wars is about hope, connection, and growth, telling the audience that it's never too late to change when you've gone down the wrong path, and what really happens when you have impatience and ego like Anakin did, and that nothing is too good to be true, that when you make a deal with the devil, you will pay for it like Anakin did. Disney can restore the soul of Star Wars, I truly believe this, but only if they stop focusing on shallow, marketable content, agendas, checkboxes, and political divisiveness. They need to start investing in the timeless story that George Lucas envisioned. If Disney truly wants Star Wars to endure, they need to honor the galaxy's heart, and that starts with putting storytelling over sales, just like George did. I love Star Wars with all my heart, and I don't want to see Disney destroy it any further by making poor decisions and hiring the wrong people. Lucasfilm used to mean something. It used to be an independent company, and now it's some massive corporate monster run by people who don't even understand its origins or foundations. People that Disney interjected into Lucasfilm. It's time we go back to what George Lucas wanted, which is to tell a good story, not to divide people. I truly believe Disney can bring it back to what it once was, at least close. I just think they need to hire the right people and to follow their hearts, to remember how they actually were before they became greedy, money-hungry people. And the funny thing is, once they learn to detach themselves from analytics and reports and greed, they're going to see profits like they've never ever seen before. I believe Star Wars can be more profitable than Marvel, DC, and every other franchise combined. You just have to tell the story. Let me know what you guys think. Can Disney restore the true magic of Star Wars, or is it too late? If there's one thing George taught us, is that there's always hope, and that it's never too late to change.